Okay.
For authors, filmmakers, entertainment, and all your listening needs. Listen now to Talk Now Radio, where no topic is taboo.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talk Now Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man. And joining me today is going to be Tiziana Stupia. And I had a brain fart right there. We're going to be discussing her book, Meeting Shiva. And if y'all want to learn more about her, you can go to www.tizianastupia.com. That's TizianaStupia.com. And she has more information about herself and her book there. If you'd like to call in and ask questions, the number is 832-632-7904. So, Tiziana, how you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Thank you, Royce. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good if I finally got that name pronunciation right.
Yes. Fantastic.
Okay. Well, usually, Tiziana, what I like to do is ask my guests to tell the listeners a little something about themselves and what got them interested in writing about the particular topic of their book to kind of break the ice.
Okay. So my name is Tiziana, as you have already said. I am half Sicilian, half German, but for the past 7 years I've been living pretty much all over the world, including the United States. I spent a year in New Mexico. I live in India mainly now, and I'm a writer. I have published my book, Meeting Shiva, Falling and Rising in Love in the Indian Himalayas, last year. It was published in the United States last year and in India this year. Apart from a writer, I'm a yoga teacher, I'm an ayurvedic consultant, and I do a lot of traveling as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I believe I read in your description or on your website that you spend most of your time between India, Germany, and where else?
England.
England,
Yeah.
okay.
Yes, I've lived for 15 years in England, actually, and so that's why.
So right now, though, you're in India, is that correct?
No, right now I'm in Germany. I come
Germany.
to Germany once a year because my family lives in Germany, and I do a little bit of work here in the summer before I go back to India.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this now. This book, Meeting Shiva, is that the only book you got out so far, or do you have others?
No, this is my first full-length book that I've published. I've published a lot of articles, but this is the first book, yeah.
Okay. Well, can you kind of give us a little sneak peek and kind of let us know a little something about what the book's about? What kind of material does it cover?
Yes. It covers the time about 7 years ago. I came to India for the first time. And I ended up living in the Himalayas. I ended up teaching English in a school in the Himalayas in a very remote area. And it's there that I had a love affair with a Hindu monk who lived in that ashram in the Himalayas. And the book is pretty much about that love affair, that story that happened behind closed doors in the ashram that I was living, and all the different things that I've learned about myself, about Indian spirituality, about life as a monk, and the transformation that happened within me after that, because it was a really intense love affair, as you can imagine, having a love affair with a monk. And it taught me really a lot, and that's what I wanted to share in this book, and that's why I wrote it.
Okay. Now, is that monk the same one that's in the picture on your website?
Is there one on my website? What picture?
Well, I had it open a minute ago looking at it.
Okay.
On the About page, Swami Rama.
No, this is my guru. You mean the one that I'm in the picture with the long beard and the long hair?
Yeah, that one.
No, that is my guru, Sri Prem Baba. He is my guru, but he's not the monk that I had an affair with.
Okay. So you still with the monk?
No. That was a very intense but quite short-lived affair of several months. But it was really, really intense, and I learned, as I said, a lot about it, and that's why I decided to write the book.
Well, I'm sure with being in an affair with a monk, you learned a lot about spirituality and, can I assume, say, the kingdom of heaven, or, well, that's a Christian concept, but I think you know what I mean by that. I mean, I'm sure for, monks of India, they got a different terminology that's for a similar place. Am I correct?
Yeah, well, really what I learned more about was actually, believe it or not, the dark side of spirituality and what happens to people when they live a life that is really quite idealized by society, and what happens behind closed doors, really, because there were certain things and certain addictions and behaviors that he had, which really, really shocked me, because when I first came to India, I was very blue-eyed, and I was like, oh, wow, everybody is so spiritual here, and everybody is so pure. And then I realized very quickly, living in ashrams, it's not quite like that. Actually, there is some stuff going on there in these places that really shocked me back into reality. And so I learned a lot about that and about what happens in a country where sexuality is so repressed as it is in India still, and how that can come out in very different and not so obvious ways. And so that was a big part of my learning there.
Well, as I understand it, I hear that sexuality is repressed in places like, I don't know, Israel, Islam, and other places like that. But I haven't really heard a lot about it over in India. Is it as bad as it is in the other countries, or maybe not quite as bad?
Well, India is really quite bad. India used to be a very free country spiritually and sexually many, many thousands of years ago, because as you probably know, the Kama Sutra and all these texts, they come out of India. But then due to the invasion of, the British and also the Mughals, it became a really sexually repressed country, and there is a lot of problems there due to that, because also the low status of women that still exists in India, and people there still in many areas of India have got to get married before they can even think about having a sexual relationship. So men and women are very segregated, and it comes out in very unhealthy ways, because of course people are people, and the hormones and the sex drive is still going to be there no matter what the culture around it is. But that results in a lot of rapes, as you may have heard in India, and in a lot of other social problems. And, because I think there is still a lot of confusion about sexuality in countries like that.
I think there's a lot of sexual oppression in most every country. Even in America, I don't think it's as bad as it is in India, but it's still exists. Yeah. And I mean, for example, over there in India, where you're telling me about, it sounds like they got laws against certain sexual behaviors, whereas in the United States, they're not as quick to enforce them on a legal basis, but it's still a condemned act. In other words, you know what I'm saying?
Yes, definitely. I mean, it's a problem, I believe, like you say, in most of the world. It's just that particular aspect I have experienced quite strongly being in India for such a long time, because I come from Germany, where sexuality isn't really that repressed. It's a pretty free country. I mean, it's got its problems as well, but I come from an area where we're pretty open, and it's quite normal for us sexuality over here. And then I came into a country where it was really quite the opposite, and I wasn't aware of it. So for me, that was a really big culture clash, and it was like, wow, okay.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from, though, because even here in America, you can see when people go from their teen years, especially into their young adult years, there's a lot of acting out in this age group. Some of them choosing alternate sexual lifestyles. Some of them going down the road of rape. And, well, in other words, it seems like when people have to repress a part of who they are, it manifests as something else somewhere else down the road, in other words.
Yes, exactly. And this is like what's a part of what I've been learning when I was living in that ashram in the Himalayas is that man who was a really lovely, capable, beautiful man, that monk, but he had to repress quite a few parts of himself because he had to pretend to be very good and very holy and very capable all of the time. And of course he was human too, so these things came out in some very strange ways once I got to know him. And that mirrored back to me certain behavioral patterns and addiction I had myself, and that's why the transformation was so huge for me resulting from that relationship. And that's really why I decided to write the book, because there were just so many things in there. It took me years to get my head around them. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. I want to share this,
I can understand that. And, one of the interesting things you just pointed out that I was hearing was it's not really just sexual oppression that has a way of manifesting in other ways. When it seems like when people are put in a position that they have to wear a mask in order to impress the public, that also comes out behind closed doors in personal relationships in unhealthy ways.
Yes, it does, definitely, yeah.
So there's something into the idea about being yourself and not being allowed to be yourself, in other words.
Yes. And having to keep up a certain mask also for the persona that you're expected to play. And I guess that's a problem with anybody who has a post of some sort of responsibility.
Well, yeah, I mean, look at the Catholic Church. For years,
yes.
They were required to be celibate and have nothing to do with sex and all of this other stuff. But yet nowadays in the news, you can hardly go by a day without hearing about some Catholic priest raping some young boy out of the congregation.
Yes, exactly. And it's the same in all religious bodies, and that's what I found in Hinduism. It may not be that, but it's like what I've heard later. I thought I was a singular case. I was like the only woman who's had an affair with a monk, in the Himalayas. But then later, after I've written the book, a lot of women wrote to me and they were like, oh my God, that's my story. That happened to me too. And then I found out, it's actually really quite common. They say they are celibate, but behind closed doors, they all have affairs with girls. Not all of them, but quite a large percentage of them. And that was really quite surprising to me.
And your monk had to keep you all behind closed doors, I take it.
Of course. It all happened in secret.
Well, I'm sure there was probably as much pressure on him as there was on you, or almost as much at least, I would think, because, y'all would have both been frowned on had it been out known about, in other words.
Yeah, well, the pressure on me wasn't really that big because I was just somebody traveling through there. I was working there, but I could have left any day. There was nothing at stake for me. But for him, it was everything to lose. If that would have come out, and if anybody would have found out, he would have immediately have lost his job and everything. And so it really was quite risky for him.
Well, is your book going to be a risk for him?
No, because I have changed his identity, like his name and the place where it happened. I've changed quite a lot of facts so that he's not recognizable in the book.
Well, when you and him are behind closed doors, did he have any extra trouble in a emotional type of relationship with you that might could be, traced back to the repression?
Well, I think we both had quite a lot of emotional problems that came out in the course of the relationship because we triggered each other off, and that's why the attraction was so strong. Because when we saw each other for the first time, we were immediately very strongly attracted to each other, and we didn't really understand why until we were well into the relationship. It had really to do with stuff that was related to my parents and to my childhood and to his parents and his childhood, and those shadows were playing themselves out against each other, but it all happened on an unconscious level, and I didn't really figure out what it was all about until the relationship was almost over, and in fact until I wrote the book, and then I could all figure it out in the time that I ended up writing the book.
Okay. Now, does the book have advice to other people that are in similar situations?
Yes, it has, because the second part of the book is all about my healing journey, about the things that I've learned through the relationship, about my own shadows, my own addictions, my own places where I needed healing. So I have written about the healing journey, what I did and what I've learned, and that really is the strong part of the book. The first part is really the entirety of our relationship, and it tells everything that happened and how it happened. But the second part gives a lot of advice, not advice as you should do this, but it just shares my story as to what I did, which in turn is inspirational for other women going through the same thing.
Okay, and about roughly how big is this book?
It's about 300 pages or something like that. Let me check, because I've got a copy around here, but it's around 300 pages.
It's a pretty much an average read then, so it takes somebody maybe, 2 or 3 days to get through it if they were just to, say, devote 8 hours a day to it or something like that.
Yeah, and I get emails from a lot of readers, and they're like, oh my God, I've read it in 1 or 2 sittings. Like, they all say they found it very gripping. And so
they didn't want to put it down, in other words.
Yeah, they tend to read it pretty fast from what I'm getting from the feedback that I'm receiving.
Okay, well, so I take it then the book has been pretty successful for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of more of a word of mouth thing because the publishers that I'm with, and I think that's quite common in the publishing world now, there isn't a whole lot that they do now for authors. The author is kind of expected to do all the PR, him or herself. They do a little bit in the beginning, and just to get the word out, but then it's kind of up to you. And the way I'm working with it, I do it in a more organic way. I don't really spend my days online trying to promote my own work. That's not really where I'm at. But I meet a lot of people when I'm traveling and that I'm communicating with, and it's kind of a word of mouth thing. So it's gotten published in the US, in the UK, in India, and it's getting published next year in Germany as well. So it's doing pretty well.
Okay. Well, I got to tell you, I think your publishers are doing probably a little bit more than you might realize because it was them that sent me the email to help set up the interview.
That's fantastic. That's good to know. When was that?
It was
a while ago, huh?
Maria Berry. It has been a while because at first you were kind of hard to reach because you were in another part of the country.
Right.
And then when you got back, we set up an interview, but then I ended up in the hospital.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
So, yeah, it covered a little bit of time because I was trying to get landed on the same page.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I work with about 4 different publishing companies, and they pretty much steadily send me people's books. They send me the media kits and want to know if I'm interested in interviewing the people, and they help us connect. So they help you people probably a little more than what you might realize behind the scenes by, contacting radio hosts and lining up interviews for you.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, when the book first came out, and it's been out for a year now, they did quite a lot of mailing. That's true for the book, but I think once the book's been out for a while, like mine has been out for a year now, they kind of normally drop off the radar then, the books, because they have lots of new releases coming out. And so then it's more or less up to the author to get the word out. That's kind of pretty much how it is these days, unless you're very famous.
That's probably true because, like you say, they get so many new releases on such a regular basis. I mean, until I started doing radio shows, I had no clue how many new books come out in a year.
I know. I mean, like now I'm in the publishing world myself, I'm like, oh my God, because I get the newsletters from my publishers and I see how much they release. And it's like impossible for them. I think they have 1 publicist or 2 publicists. And that's why they spent initially a few hours on getting the word out to all the people. But then I don't really think they can promote all the different titles that they have on an ongoing basis. It's just not possible for them because there's just too much stuff out there.
Well, yeah, but yours is a little on the unique side. I don't know many people that's writing about love affairs with a monk, in other words.
Yes, and I mean, it is quite unique. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, it's pretty unique, and it's something that a lot of people are like, well, I wonder what that would actually be like, because most people have never thought about it.
Yes, that's true.
I know, I never thought about it till I talked to you.
That's probably a good thing.
But are you thinking about writing any more books?
Yes, I'm thinking of writing another book now. In fact, in the next 2-3 years, I'm off to India again in 2 weeks to start my research for a book on the Himalayan tradition, because I'm also very involved in Indian spirituality, and I'm living pretty much in the Himalayas now. So I want to write about that tradition that is still very much alive there, of all the different saints and sages and sadhus that live in the mountains doing their spiritual practice. And there's a lot of magical things that happen in those mountains. So I just want to spend some time there and really write about their stories.
So this is in the area of India that's not far from, say, where the Rig Vedas were created, or the Mahabharata, if I'm pronouncing it correctly?
Mahabharata, yeah.
Mahabharata, okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't far off. But you'll be studying the, from the actual, I guess, people that are still doing these spiritual acts. You're going to be studying them from that same area over there, huh?
Yeah, I mean, my plan is, I haven't really got a fixed plan, but because I spend a lot of time in those mountains, you know, and I meet a lot of really incredible people that have lived in those mountains for their whole lives, and a lot of them really have supernatural powers. They do a lot of pranayama breathing exercises, and there is just so much that we don't really see here in the West and that we don't fathom. We can't really quite understand what goes on there, and it's really magical. So, and a lot of books have been written about those gurus and about those practices already, but of course every writer gives a unique perspective, and I just want to see where it leads me and then, you know, let it flow into my own story, because what I as a writer focus on really is my own experience and my own story, interwoven and influenced by the people that I meet on my journeys.
Okay. When you say supernatural, can you give us some kind of example? I mean, are we talking levitation or telepathy or... Huh?
Yeah, and there are people, they don't eat or drink anything. They live on prana, on the life force. You know, they have done so many breathing exercises, so much meditation in those mountains, and they don't actually need to eat anything or drink anything. And, you know, levitation is something that is actually quite easily achieved in yoga. It's not a very difficult feat. And there is a lot of stuff, you know, these people can communicate with each other without actually using phone, anything. I mean, there is just so many things, and they have all been written about before. And you read these stories, and they sound quite magical, like fairy tales, but actually when you meet them and when you see, well, these people actually really exist in those mountains, that is quite mind-boggling when you come from the West.
Well, some of that would be condemned here in the West.
Definitely, yeah, especially by the food concerns. Like, imagine if we all stopped eating.
Well, you know, it seems to me like most of the suppression that's really gone down about sexuality, magical arts, any kind of type of, you know, magic or witchcraft or whatever, has all stemmed from the monotheistic divine right space of Abraham.
Definitely, yeah, I think so.
And they're the only one that they stand out alone because they're the only faiths that the ones that descend from him that condemn all these things. The other faiths have no problem with them.
Yeah. Because, like, one thing I really like about Hinduism and the Vedic wisdom is that it's all about how you yourself can become godlike, how you can become a wonderful, godlike human being. And it's possible if you do the right practices. And the other religions, from, you know, the experience that I have in them, it's all about, yes, there is prayer, but unless you are a mystic and you're involved in mysticism, those religions don't really show you how you can yourself become a better, more powerful person. And with powerful, I don't mean powerful in the world. I mean spiritually powerful, that you can actually become all you can be. And yeah, we call it a godlike person, and it's just a person who has opened his or her heart and is completely aligned with the divine power. And that is just so wonderful if you can empower yourself on that journey. And not, the mainstream religions don't really tell you how to do that. And the yogic, the Sanatan Dharma, it's all there, and that is just endless and wonderful.
So I take it you'll be covering some of this in your next book?
Yes.
Well, that much is good. But like I say, I've heard a little bit about some of the things that they got over there, and some of it they actually televise. Like you got people that will lay down on a bed of nails, and none of the nails will go through them, for example. Yeah, fakirs. And, you know, and these things, they're called siddhis in the Vedic terminology. They're like supernatural powers. And these things are actually a very low form of spiritual powers that you can get. I mean, you see quite a lot of people in India, and they have these powers, and they produce wristwatches and sacred ash out of thin air and all these kind of magic tricks. And people are impressed by that, but really it's not something that is highly rated in spirituality, because spirituality is all in Hinduism to align yourself with your higher self. And for that, you don't really need any magic tricks or anything like that. You know, that's really just to impress people. And in fact, it increases your ego rather than decreases it. These supernatural powers, they kind of naturally come the more spiritual practice you do. But we are always advised to ignore those because they're just a distraction from your actual goal. Well, I think you hit the key word just a minute ago when you said ego.
Yeah.
Because from my understanding, most of the India teachings is about calming down the ego, getting to take more of a back street. A lot of people, they make the mistake of thinking you're supposed to destroy the ego, but that's like destroying a part of yourself. It's more about a training of allowing the soul to lead and the getting the ego to work in tune with the soul, in other words.
Yes, definitely. I mean, because a lot of people, like, that I meet also, it's all about, oh, the ego is bad and you shouldn't have an ego. But it's not possible to exist in the world if you don't have an ego. But it's really about developing our animal ego, so to speak, into a healthy, mature ego in which we know what's good for us. And like you say, letting the soul lead rather than our own will and our own desires lead the way.
Now, the monk that you were involved with, was he practicing any of this here stuff himself?
Yeah, he was practicing pranayama, and he was practicing a lot of bhakti yoga, a lot of devotional practices like chanting of sacred mantras and doing puja and aarti and all these things. So yeah, he was doing all of that.
Did he have any supernatural abilities?
Not that I know of. He was very sensitive and very telepathic. We were quite telepathic with each other, but beyond that, I don't know.
Well, do people really have to devote the biggest part of their days in, say, meditation and prayer in order to achieve this, or can they limit how much they do it so they have time to function in the rest of the world as well?
Well, there are different philosophies around that. If you've read Autobiography of a Yogi, for example, that's all about the practice of Kriya Yoga. And the practice of Kriya Yoga has been condensed by the Mahavatar Babaji into about 45 minutes, so that all these Kriyas, all these practices that used to take a very long time can be done by the layman or by the normal person in about 45 minutes. Yeah. So because really the ideal is, so to speak, that you can function in the world but also in your inner world, so that there should be a balance between the two. Now, having said that, I'm still not quite sure about that, because when I'm up there in the Himalayas, and I just did a 40-day silent retreat where I did a lot of spiritual practice, and what happens in such a condensed time of spiritual practice is really quite incredible, how the experiences you can have and how fast you can go with that, which doesn't really happen when you're in the world and you do your hour, 2 hours a day. There are a lot of distractions in the world, so it can be really good to go into seclusion for a part of your life, maybe not for your whole life, but maybe for a year or two. I think it can be very beneficial. But overall, if you've got duties and responsibilities in the world, you have to kind of attend to them as well, especially if you've got family.
Yeah, family is one of the biggest drawbacks to the spiritual path of anything I could think of, because there's not just the time that you devote to your family, but it's also the stress factors that the family puts on you on an emotional level.
Definitely. And, and a lot of the sadhus in India, they choose not to get married. They don't have children, and they actually even cut all ties with their families, which is really quite a hard thing to do. But in India, they kind of almost have to do it, because families work in a different way in India. I'm sure you might know about it, but the family is very, very sacred in India, and the parents still tell the children whom to marry, what career to take. And if a son or daughter decides, okay, I'm going to dedicate my life to God, I want to go to the Himalayas or to some ashram, a lot of parents these days say, no, we don't want you to do that, so the child has to run away. In fact, I know a young man now who has just run away for the 4th time from his parental home. And this young man is 32 years old. But his parents won't let him leave. And every time he goes away, his elder brothers are sent behind him and they bring him back. And you can imagine this man is 32. In the West, that would be like, what? But in India, it's quite normal. And so that's why a lot of these guys who become sadhus have actually got to run away and never tell anybody where they are.
Wow, I could never picture that happening here in the United States.
Yeah. And it's quite tragic, because the monk that I had the relationship with, he had a very good relationship with his family, but he had to cut the ties because the mother kept calling him, oh, I want you to come back, I don't want you to be a monk. And actually his father committed suicide because he was so heartbroken by the fact that his son had chosen to do this. And so this guilt is going to be with him for the rest of his life. And that is really quite tragic because the parents just could not accept the path that he had chosen.
Well, were the parents by any chance Christians or Judaizers?
No, they were Hindu. They were Hindu, but they wanted a different life for their son. They wanted, because, he was in the army before he became a monk. And he had a proper job, and they wanted him to get married, and he was the eldest son, and they just didn't want him to be a sadhu.
Wanted him to carry on the family name too, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, exactly. And there is so much conflict in a lot of these Indian young people that decide to become a monk or a nun. And it's really not so easy. They can't just say to their parents, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I mean, some parents accept it, but a lot of them don't.
I would, assuming from listening to you, that the biggest majority of them don't.
Yeah, and it's really, I mean, after I had the relationship with the monk, I had a relationship with another Indian man, and we were together for a couple of years, and it was really quite interesting to observe how much of a stronghold the parents have on their children, even when the children are grown-up men with their own careers and they don't even live in India any longer. And it's almost like most decisions that you make as an adult, if you are Indian, you have to get agreed upon by your parents. And I don't know this at all from the West, of course. I mean, here you're 18 and you do what you want. In India,
pretty much.
Yeah. I mean, I left home when I was 16, and it wasn't really a big deal. But there, it's very, very different. And I didn't understand this at first. And I learned a lot from that because I'm like, wow, And you almost have to ask permission for every big life step that you take. If you want to get married, if you want to do this, and the parents will say, well, no, we don't want you to marry this person. And a lot of the Indian children will accept that because that's the culture. The parents are your superiors. They're almost like your gods, and you surrender to them. You do what they want, whether you're happy or not. That's not the question. They know best, and that's kind of generally accepted.
I would have to disagree with that culture personally from my own logical standpoint. It would seem to me like the better route would be as soon as a child's old enough to take responsibility, they should have the wings cut and go make their own mistakes and learn from their own lives. Am I right? I don't know, but it seems logical to me.
Well, that's how we know it, and that's how we've grown up. I mean, there are some very good things about the Indian culture as well, because when two people get married over there, and you know what it's like here, a lot of the marriages end in divorce because people fall in love and then they marry for really foolish reasons, and then they kind of wake up and decide, oh, well, we don't really like each other. But in India...
Do they fall in love or do they fall in lust?
Yes, exactly. And in India, it's a little different because when two people are chosen for each other, the parents take actually a lot of time. They will compare the horoscopes. They will see that the children come from the same backgrounds and they have similar careers, and then they match a lot of points up. And because it's not just two people getting married, it's actually two families that are getting married. So a lot of the marriages, even when they're arranged and there's no love in the beginning, a lot of them actually work out quite fine because the parents kind of see, okay, these people, they could get along and their backgrounds match and blah, blah, blah. So believe it or not, a lot of these arranged marriages are actually quite happy.
So in that case, what's love got to do with it is a going feature.
Yeah.
I mean, you just described a situation where the parents decided what was best, whether there was love involved in it or not, and it worked out well anyway. So that leads the person to ask, what's love got to do with it?
Yeah, but I think there in India, see, here it is like that. The love comes first, and then the marriage comes, many years later in some cases. But there, it's generally accepted the marriage comes first and love will come later. I mean, there are love marriages as well in India now.
So they count on growing to love each other.
Yeah, they're growing to love each other, and it's just a different type of relationship, perhaps a more mature relationship, because they don't have that expectation of, oh, I have to be madly in love. I mean, it's just accepted, and divorce really doesn't happen very much in India, unless in very extreme cases. You get married there, and it's expected, okay, we're going to be together until the end of our lives, for better or worse now. And there are pros and cons to that system, just as there are pros and cons for our system. But, when you look at how many people actually stay together nowadays in the West, it's also not so great.
Well, do they have problems with spousal abuse and child abuse over there?
Oh, it's terrible. Yeah, a lot, unfortunately. There is a lot of violence against women in India still because of the relatively low status of women. And you may have heard about that there was a lot of abortions when a woman notices she's carrying a girl child because of the whole dowry issue. There used to be a lot of abortions and also female infanticide deaths. So there is a lot of that going on, and there's a lot of rape, even of children now. Like whenever I open a newspaper in India, every day there is something, oh, this young child got raped, or this 14-year-old girl, and gang raped as well. So there is, unfortunately, a lot of that going on there as well.
So some of the stuff that we've been talking about, have you put it in your book and, like narrated your ideas about it?
Yes, I have written quite a lot about that because when I was first living in India, I came into India knowing nothing about the country actually, really not very much at all. I just ended up there by coincidence really because I was in Pakistan and then it was just right next door to India and I kind of went and that was the beginning of a long love affair, but I didn't really know anything about the country. So through my stay there, the first time I came to India, I was there for 5 months and then I ended up having that relationship also. And I learned so much that I didn't know, like these things we were just talking about. So yes, I did write about them, definitely.
Good. That gives the listeners an idea exactly what kind of ground you cover.
Yes.
Without actually reading the book to them on the show.
Yes.
Which that's what I was trying to accomplish.
Yes, very good.
It sounds pretty interesting, though, because there's so many things that people here in the West, especially in America, they don't really know about, the different cultures in Greece, India, Asia, or anywhere else for that matter, because they're not living there. They know what they hear on the news. They know what the teachers in school teach. They know what the preachers teach. But isn't that always a lot different than what you actually find when you get there? Definitely.
I mean, I'll give you an example. Like I mentioned, I was in Pakistan. And, everything you hear about Pakistan is so bad. You hear like, oh, these people, they kill each other all the time and they decapitate you when you go there and it's just terrible. And this is the pictures you see in the news of Islamabad, the capital. It's always dust and guns and people shouting, right? And I came there. I actually went there about 7 years ago. That was on that trip when I ended up in India. And I fell in love with the country. It is absolutely magnificent. The people are so kind and hospitable. And it's just a wonderful country, and you just wouldn't believe it. And yes, there are extremists there. Of course, people get assassinated, but the Taliban is actually a very, very small percentage of the Pakistani population. Maybe 1% is that, and these are the troublemakers. But the average person living over there is beautiful and kind and open-hearted, and I made so many friends there. And, and you don't see that on the news.
Well, last I heard, the Taliban fell off the radar and been pretty much replaced by ISIS.
Yes, of course. There's always going to be some crazy people around, and at the moment it's that new formation. But that was really just to give you an example of how the media portrayal can get it so wrong. Because you say, we don't know what it's like. Yeah.
No doubt. I mean, let's face it, I just saw on Facebook last night or this morning, I forget which, a picture where on the bottom half it had KKK members wearing their robe and their mask in a crowd, terrorizing the blacks. And above that, it had pictures of ISIS standing there with a sword over somebody's head and saying India or wherever, Iraq is not the only place that has terrorists, in other words. So they were equating our KKK with ISIS in that picture, in other words. But it's an interesting thing that really we're no different. We just, they don't use names like ISIS in that here. They just use KKK or some other organization, in other words.
Yeah, well, definitely. And every country, and I would say every human being has the dark and the light within them. And that's what we're all made of, because people often say, oh, these people are so terrible, they decapitate others and they kill others and blah, blah, blah. But I think what we often fail to realize is that we all have that potential given the right circumstances. And that's something I'm very interested in, especially coming from Germany also with the history that we've got. with the Nazis and everything, and everybody was pointing the finger at Germany at the time. And of course, it was a terrible thing what happened back then. But tell me a country in which it didn't happen. You know, it happened in America with the Native Americans, and it happened in so many other countries also. So I think, given the right or wrong circumstances, we all have the potential to become like that. And we are often so quick to point the finger.
Which, in all honesty, I think if you really follow the map around and, you know, look at what happened with Napoleon, look at what happened with Hitler, look what's happening in America today, you'll find out at the root of every one of these here is usually a religious faith, usually monotheistic, that's, you know, the perpetrator of all this to begin with.
Yes, definitely.
So it's not really the country so much as it is the actual religious movement inside the country that's actually creating the problem. I mean, like ISIS is a religious zealot group too.
Well, I wouldn't call it a religion, really. I think it's just they're using religion as an excuse, because I cannot really call anything a religion that insists on killing everyone who thinks differently. I mean, that is not a religion, that's an ideology to me. And, you know, it's just a very sad excuse for religion, actually, in my opinion.
Well, I can understand where you're coming from, and I can even tend to agree with you. The only thing is, for practical layman's terms, they would disagree with you. They would say, no, we're a religious group, and we're killing for God. Now, you and me both know that God never asked anybody to kill anyone.
Exactly.
In their mind, they would think of themselves as that, and in most of America's minds, and there's only a handful of people that would say, well, they're really more of an ideology, even if it is more accurate, in other words. At least it seems something like that, but we're talking semantics here.
Sure, of course. But I think at the end of the day, it always comes down to human beings. You know, I worked in the prison service for some time, and I was doing spiritual counseling in sex offenders' prisons, and I was very interested at that time. What drives a man to do something like that? To rape his own daughter, to rape another woman, a child, whatever. And when I came out I worked there for several years, and, you know, these men taught me actually a lot, because what I finally got to understand is that every person who hurts another person has been hurt him or herself. And that is really quite simple. And I think all these people also, like, you know, these extremists that we were just talking about, you have to look at where are they coming from. It's never an excuse, of course, for that kind of behavior, but in order to understand it, I think we have to look at, well, why is it happening in the first place? Why are these people so angry that they want to kill everyone who doesn't think like they do? Why can't they be tolerant? You know, and there is always a reason for it.
Oh, I think I know part of the reason, to be honest with you, because I know I've sit in church and people will quote passages out of the Bible where that city where Lot lived, where they destroyed it, Sodom and Gomorrah, in other words, and other places that were against God, where God destroyed them. I think when people hear these religious terms, or hear about God wreaking revenge on the Canaanites or whatever, they begin to think if they don't defend God, they don't be God's executioner, they don't get rid of the evil as they perceive it, they have to have a fear that God's going to destroy them while destroying the evil. And this may not be true, but I think it's what they believe, whether it's true or not, in other words.
Yes. But then there might be something that goes even deeper than that, because I can read these stories, and you know the Old Testament, which is more full of that kind of stuff, and then you have the New Testament, which is actually very different. The story of Jesus, you know, it's a lot more relaxed and a lot more loving, and you know, and I can look at these stories, and then I can make up my own mind. Well, is this what I want to do in my life? Do I want to go around and destroy everything that doesn't think like I do? You know, and you can make that distinction, but I guess not everybody can make the distinction, or maybe not everybody wants to make that distinction because it serves their purpose. But what I'm interested in is also, well, why? You know, can we go deeper than that? Why are they like that they want to have so much anger to kill everyone who is different?
Yeah. I really would think that it'd go back to fear at some level or another. I've never known a better motivator than fear.
Right. Yeah, and I think you're probably hitting the nail on the head there, fear.
But yeah, that's still, it doesn't get us any closer to solving a problem. It just kind of helps us understand the root of the problem.
Right. Yes. But it always helps, because I think if you understand where it's coming from, then you can start looking at solutions.
I'd be more than happy to look at solutions.
Yes, me too. I've always said, I used to do a lot of vipassana meditation. It's a Buddhist type of meditation. And I always said to my friends, what we should do with the Taliban? We should all have them do vipassana meditation. They should all do the 10-day course. After you come out of a vipassana meditation, you no longer want to kill anybody. You just want to sit in love.
Maybe let them go into anger management while they're at it.
Yes, exactly.
I got to tell you though, nothing works as good for mastery of anger as self-injury.
Self-injury?
Well, yeah, like if you get mad and you put your arm through a window and lose partial use of it, that does a lot to teach you to manage your anger.
Yes, definitely.
But again, we're talking about people's perspective and how do they receive things, because another person would probably get mad and want to kill themselves because they did something stupid.
Yes, that's right too. The human being is really quite complex.
Yeah, so now you got to ask yourself, why does one person take an event and they want to get violent with others about it? Another one wants to get violent with themselves, and yet another in the same event doesn't want to do anything. Right.
It's interesting, no?
And I don't know that we can ever understand that aspect. And a lot of it, I'm sure, probably does go back to the way the person was brought up and how it affects their perception. I can't help but feel that perception lies at the root of 90% of everything. I mean, you can't have fear without perceiving the fear.
Well, exactly. And I think that's what we're working at with our spiritual practices, because when you meditate, that's when all these perceptions and all these illusions fall away, and then you see reality as it really is. And that's why it's so fascinating to me, because really we are all living in an illusion, because we're just seeing things through our own individual filters that are conditioned upon us from when we were children, how we were brought up, our society. But when we start doing spiritual practice, all these filters start to dissolve, and then we can really truly see what things are like. And that's why I'm saying, everybody should be doing vipassana meditation or any kind of meditation, because then everybody would be a lot happier and there would be a lot less bloodshed in the world.
If you can get everybody to do it, it'd be the trick.
Yes, well, exactly. That is the difficult thing. How do you get the people to do it,
But what we were talking about goes back to what you said earlier when you said deeper than that. To what I said, I think the perception would be the deeper than that.
Yes, exactly, yeah. Because it is all the false perception. It's all like in Hinduism we say the Maya, the illusion. And when those veils start dissolving, then we are truly free.
I just interviewed a man Wednesday, I think it was, or Thursday. Mm-hmm. Might have been Thursday at 1 o'clock. We had a 2-hour interview. And we were talking about who controls the perception of America of reality. And, I never got to talking to him on the same level we're talking to now. But, the two go hand in hand because, again, I think there's units out there that realize if you can control people's perceptions, you can control their actions. Mm-hmm. When you get a person to perceive fear, you get a person to perceive a need for action to defend.
Right.
It's the need for war, for example.
Yeah.
So I think there's units of people out there that use propaganda to push this kind of material because they have a vested interest in war.
Exactly, and that's why all this marketing is so successful. I mean, you can sell almost anything if the marketing is good. And it's the same with fear. There's all like what you were just saying, but that's all false perception. And that's why, again, we're coming back to the practice of meditation or whatever else it is that can dissolve that, because then you will really see, okay, this is just fear-based. It doesn't apply to me. I don't have to buy into that.
Well, does your book cover anything about the meditation?
Yes, it covers also about meditation. I mean, it covers my healing journey primarily, but I also brush upon those practices. Not so much in depth, but, I do talk about them.
It sounds to me like it's going to be a very fascinating book. It really does. However, we got like 9 minutes remaining, and before I let you escape, so to speak, I want to make sure that you covered everything you wanted to talk about.
Well, I hadn't really had any agenda about what I wanted to talk about, so I've just let you take the lead.
Well, I wanted to kind of give you a chance to let everybody get an idea about as much about the book as you can without actually reading the book.
Yes. Well, I mean, we've covered pretty much what the book is about, you know. I think we've given people quite a good overview, unless you think there's anything else.
Well, when do you think you're going to come out with the next book? How much longer down the road do you think it's going to be?
I don't really know, because I have to see how things go now, because what I want to do in the Himalayas also, I'd like to set up a little retreat meditation center for people. And that's going to take a little bit of time. And I'm doing the research for the book kind of alongside. So it really depends on when I can get a year or so that I can just sit down and write the next book. And I'm not quite sure when that will be. Maybe between 3 to 5 years. You know.
So you're basically going to be off the grid a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I write a lot of articles. I have a blog called Nachiketa's Quest, and that's linked on my website. So I post maybe once a month or once every 2 weeks. I post a new article about spirituality, meditation, yoga on there. So that's really what I do as a writer, because writing a book takes such a long time. I mean, it's taken me 3.5 years to write Meeting Shiva. And, you know, you have to sit a lot of hours and write. And because I've got a life outside of being a writer as well, I don't always have that sustained amount of time. So I tend to write more articles. I can write an article in a day. So I tend to focus more on that when I'm not writing books.
Plus, I'm pretty sure you spend quite a chunk of time in meditation. I had that.
Yes, exactly. And that's why the rest of my work, it takes a while, because my spiritual practice always comes first. So, you know, that is the most important thing, and it gets interrupted. Sometimes I disappear for 40 days into the mountains. And so, yeah, but everything in its time. There's no rush.
You kind of go live off the land?
Yes.
So when you do this, do you have any kind of electricity or any other creature comforts?
Yeah, when I did this retreat now in the Himalayas, I had a little cottage by the Ganga, and it did have electricity, but mind you, in the Himalayas there are power cuts 4 to 5 times a day, so you don't often have electricity. But it had running water, which was very nice, and it had a bathroom, and I got my food in the adjacent ashram, so I don't really live in a cave, no.
Yeah, but when the lights are out, don't it get pretty hot in there?
Yeah, it does. It was very, very hot, because I was there in May and June. Oh my God, it was so hot. But then luckily the monsoon arrived and it got a bit cooler. But that's all part of it, you know. We call it tapasya, which is austerity in Hinduism. And when you practice tapasya, austerity, it actually generates good karma in the way that it's really good to overcome these things like aversion to heat and cold and to hunger and thirst and to tiredness. It's good to develop self-control like that sometimes.
Which goes back to what you were saying about the supernatural abilities of people over in India. They probably, they don't have any problem, with cooler weather or hotter weather, or,
no.
They kind of have an internal, thermometer, you might call it, or something of that nature.
Yes, exactly. And a lot of these practices really are there to demolish the aversions and the cravings, like, you know, because that's really the stuff that drives us to do all sorts of stupid actions. You know, we're having aversion to something, or we crave for something. And when you don't have that, you're truly free, when everything is great for you. Like, the worst thing can happen in your life and you're still calm, you know. So, and that takes an incredible amount of mind control and self-control. And that's what we're really practicing as well.
Well, yeah, if you let somebody scratch somebody's car, the person whose car got scratched wants to go off and beat the fool out of somebody.
Exactly, yeah.
If they had learned that it's just a car, you can still drive it, or, you know, what about people that walk to work? All of a sudden beating somebody's brains in doesn't seem so important.
Yeah, exactly. And it's these little things that make our life very miserable, and they cause a lot of suffering. And when we can actually see, well, you know, it's not that big a deal, then life becomes a lot more joyful.
I think a lot of people here in America, material things is going to be a big deal because people in America have been very spoiled to air conditioners, computers, TVs, radios. I mean, you name it, they've had it.
Yeah, you should all send them to me when I'm in India because I have none of that when I'm over there. And it's actually really great. I relish that when I don't have to have mobile phone and internet, when all that stuff gets switched off and there's no air conditioning and living very, very simply in the mountains. And the internal richness I get from that and the actual internal joy from just being in silence is really, really wonderful. And I think, you know, because what I've noticed when I was in the mountains and it was so hot, oh my God, I was melting in that hut. And then there was all these flies because I didn't have fly screens and they were sitting all over my body and all over my food and I was like, oh my God, this is so terrible. But then I thought, you know what, it's actually really good because when we have all this stuff like air conditioning and all these things that we have, we gain control over our environment, but we lose all control over ourselves. And that is actually really sad because we really don't have any control over ourselves any longer. We behave and we react all the time to everything that comes our way. React. And we're just puppets. And that's really not cool.
That's when you've got less spirituality also because everything's, you know, being hinged on the material.
Yeah, it's all material. It's all about we are the body. And of course, the body is part of us, but we are not just the body. And we can gain mastery over that to a certain extent so that we're not so suffering and so knocked about by life any longer. And that's really the point of spirituality also. It's like how we can lead a harmonious life in harmony with ourselves, in harmony with the people around us. And the practices just really help with that.
Yeah, I was about to say there's some people can't stand to live with themselves, much less anybody else.
Yes, exactly, yeah.
I mean, if you see a person that wants to kill themselves and they're popping antidepressants to keep from doing it, there's a person probably can't stand themselves, much less anybody else.
Yeah, right.
I mean, who else is supposed to kill themselves except somebody who can't stand themselves?
Yeah, right.
I mean, that's my logic anyway.
Yeah, you're right, Royce.
I want to let everybody, thank everybody for listening in. Know you probably haven't been here live, but I'm sure you'll be listening to me at YouTube and even at my site in the archives. Y'all want to stop by Wednesday night, 7 p.m. Central Time. I'm going to be talking to David Roundtree and Robert Lund about their book, Demon Street. It was a great book and they make a great interview, so you don't want to miss it. I hope to see you guys then. And Tiziana, I want to thank you for joining me and having this talk today. It's been very interesting, and I really have enjoyed talking to you.
Yes, I have enjoyed talking to you too, Royce. Thank you very much for this interview.
And with that, folks, I'm going to say goodbye. Y'all have a good what's left of the weekend, and y'all take care of yourselves. Don't forget to come see me Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Bye-bye.